Are our other two judges present, just with cameras off? We can just check in.
Yes, I apologize to everyone. I'm currently fasting, so at this point of the day, my head is killing, so I'm trying to minimize screen time, but I will be flowing and paying attention.
I'm glad you're there. Caitlin, are you there?
I am also here and will have my camera on momentarily. I'm just switching over to a different network.
Can we start the debate?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, congratulations, Dina and Isaac. Have at it.
All right, just a quick note. I apologize if my voice is a little bit hoarse. I've been fasting all day as well, so it's been a lot of talking. All right, if everyone's ready, then I will start now. Hello, and I'd like to thank everyone for making this debate possible. Today I will be affirming the resolution that the space race was a waste of money. First, I'd like to get into a few definitions in the weighing mechanism. The space race was the competition between the US and the Soviet Union to develop aerospace capabilities, including artificial satellites, unmanned space projects, and human flights into space, and waste as in the use without adequate return, and the weighing mechanism for today's debate will be preponderance of the evidence. So whichever side has the most evidence supporting their case wins today's debate. Now, moving right into my first contention, that we had more important expensive we could have used the money for. The US, according to the Bill of Rights Institute, spent about $30 billion on the space race. This money could have been used in much more important domestic issues, such as, but not limited to, education, infrastructure, debt, and more affordable healthcare. These issues would have had a greater impact and benefited the American people much more than the space race has. Therefore, the money we spent on the space race was a waste compared to the money we could have used to spend on more important issues to the American people. My second contention was the increased tensions in the Cold War. The success of the Soviets made the US afraid that the military had fallen behind, and the launch of Sputnik only served to intensify the arms race and worsen relationships between the US and the Soviet Union, according to the milestone in histories of foreign relations. Essentially, the space race was started because the US was afraid that the Soviet Union had gone a little bit ahead in the space exploration process. And when the US retaliated by funding more of their time, money, and effort into this space race, relations between the two countries worsened and fueled the Cold War into extending it as long as it did. When this money could have been used into creating a more peaceful resolution and ending it sooner, therefore benefiting the people of both the Soviet Union and the US, the space race was a waste of money when it could have been put to more beneficial efforts and could have saved people from having to live through the Cold War. My last contention was, what did we really accomplish? The space race did produce efforts to launch satellites and send space probes of the moon, Venus, and Mars, and we did have people land on the moon. And that's all great and amazing, but at the end of the day, what does that really do for the American people beyond just having something to say that we accomplished as America? At the end of the day, the money, time, and effort we put into this space war could have been better served if we had only focused on the American people and our own domestic interests. By doing this, all we have really accomplished is just adding another check to our resume and saying, oh, we did that. That's really cool. And yes, it did do a lot to expand what we know about space. However, there are so many more domestic issues, such as climate change, ocean exploration even, that would have been better served for our people. Therefore, on the basis of the many domestic issues, we could have devoted time, money, and effort to instead. And the fact that this space war only exasperated the conflict between the US and the Soviet Union, I strongly urge an affirmation vote. Thank you.
Dina, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes,
Awesome. Are you ready for cross?
I am.
Are my judges ready? Awesome. Just making sure. Cool. 2 minutes begins now. Thank you so much, Dina, for an incredible speech. You're an incredible speaker, and I really appreciated your contentions. I do have a couple of questions. So my first is, would you mind restating your definition of waste for me?
Use without adequate return.
Awesome. And if you don't mind me asking, how are we going to define adequacy today?
Adequate just in the terms of what you would expect to receive in return for what you put in.
Awesome. That works. And then just to make sure I have your tags correctly, your first contention is that there's better alternatives. Your second is that there's an increase in tensions. And your third is that we didn't really accomplish anything.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Relating to your first contention about healthcare, can you list the other things you mentioned? I'm sorry, I couldn't write them down fast enough.
No problem. Education, infrastructure, reducing our debt, and of course, healthcare.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. And then what was the timeline on the space race?
I did not have those dates written down.
That's okay. We've got 30 minutes. It's no worries. And then on your second contention about increased tensions, when did the Cold War end?
Oh, wow. My history teacher is going to be so mad at me. I want to say it's like 1983 or 85, somewhere.
No worries. No worries. Yeah, really obscure question. I looked it up before, so there's no worries. And then on your last contention about accomplishing anything, is there innate value to putting men on the moon? Or people on the moon, I should say.
I believe beyond as just a show of like what we can do. There's really no benefit to like the normal citizen that we did that.
Awesome. Thank you, Dina. Are my judges ready for a 6-minute rebuttal? And I guess net constructive. Awesome. Awesome. I will go ahead and start my time now. Just wanted to start by thanking everyone for being here. Judges, you guys are incredible. I know it's been a long day, especially those of you that have like externalities you're dealing with. I really appreciate that. Appreciate you for being here, Dina. I know it's late, but you're great. You're great for a speech. Let's jump right in. I negate the resolve that the space race was a waste of money. I kind of want to define the space race just a little bit more. I agree with my opponent's definition, but I think that we could use some more specificity. The July 1st, 2020 astronomy explains that space race started on August 2nd of 1955 and ended either on July 17th of 1975 or July 20th of 1969. The first of those dates is when we ended up having joint missions with Russia in orbit. The latter of the date is when Neil Armstrong's up on the moon. I just think it's nuanced. I don't know if it'll matter that much. So I'm going to jump into my case, and then I'll give you their case. I think the weighing mechanism is fine. This is a fact ground preponderance of evidence. That's perfectly reasonable. So let's jump into the negation case. My first contention is technological innovation. So the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure explains the space race had a ton of really critical innovations, specifically medical imaging techniques, durable healthcare equipment, artificial limbs, water filtration, firefighting equipment, shock absorbers, air purifiers, insulation for homes, airplanes that are weather resistant, and infrared thermometers. I'm going to go over a couple, big ones. I don't want to get into this messy debate. So I'm going to outline 5 that I think are important. So we have points of clash. The first is imaging, right? So Eugene Lally, who worked for, he conceptualized digital photography at NASA's during the space race. These image sensors that he created were used to create the first digital cameras. Witness explains the consequences of the development of these cameras. Witness is an organization founded in 1992 that is committed to exposing injustices in the world. They explain that the capacity to photograph and video injustices gives legitimacy to individuals that would otherwise be relegated to the periphery of the justice system. And we see this manifest in a ton of ways. Witness has this massive report on it. They talk about human rights abuses against women in Afghanistan, the death of George Floyd, and how filming was critical for exposing injustices against Black Americans, the Arab Spring as a form of democracy mobilization, anti-propaganda in Russia, right? There's really no way to counter propaganda without accurate imaging. And over 20,000 photos are being used to prosecute Russia and the Russo-Ukrainian conflict from the ICC. That's all really beneficial. Let's go over 4 others. USA Today on July 8th of 2019 explains insulin pumps is something that was developed during the space race. Specifically in the Viking expedition in the 1970s, they created what's called a microfluid control system. It's the same system that's used for an insulin pump to have an IV injection, which reduces the likelihood of fatality by 29%. LASIK is a big one. The Goosey dentist, John Goosey is his name. He's a dentist. He explains that LASIK was originally used to correct astronauts' vision, but now 30 million people have gotten it, which corrected their eyesight. How Stuff Works explains that solar cells were developed during the space race in order to launch satellites and make them sustainable, and they've been critical to environmental efforts. And with regards to water purification, ion purification, chemical purification emerged in the space race. And according to the University of San Francisco in 2020, 1/3 of people in the world don't have clean water. And of the World Health Organization's recommendations, 9 out of the 25 water purification systems use this ion purification. It's huge. It's beneficial. It makes clean water. My second contention is actually easing tensions, right? So you're going to cross-apply this against their second contention so that we don't have to have a ton of clash later in the speech. RNF in 2016 explains that the point of the space race was not designed to exacerbate conflicts, right? But it was a pursuit of power in space. Time on October 7th of 2022 explains the joint mission Suez, right, or Soyuz, which was during the Cold War, eased the tensions and forced bilateral efforts. It was the first joint mission between Russia and the United States with a consolidated goal. The National Security Archive in 2021 from GW explains the space race as like a competitive element was largely symbolic, but it was cooperative in nature. Kennedy and Nixon both participated with Khrushchev and Brezhnev, which were the leaders of Russia at the time, which was like unparalleled, right? That was crazy. The idea of these two global superpowers duking it out, but then working cooperatively on a space mission really eased bilateral tensions. There's a ton of examples of this. I think the most compelling evidence that I have for this is Karsten Worth's report in the Journal of American Studies published in 2004 that lists that while Sputnik was originally seen as a threat, right, the story changed because after we ended up realizing that we could work cooperatively, the battle between the US and Russia shifted from a military one to one that was based on cooperation, right? It's essentially, rather than proving superiority on like a military battlefield, it was proven through civilian technological developments, which is really cool. So it actually eased tensions in the Cold War. So let's jump into my opponent's other 2 contentions. First, my opponent says there's better alternatives. I have a couple responses to this. First, and arguably most importantly, most of them wouldn't have passed at the time at which we were evaluating these things, right? You're talking Cold War, anti-communism, McCarthyism, United States. You're not going to see consolidated healthcare access in the United States with or without the space race. We spent the money on innovations that have had long-standing developments, and that has a lot of value. That's my 1. The 2 is their definition is use without adequate return. Regardless of whether or not there were alternatives, we clearly saw adequate returns. And then on the third contention, cross-apply mine for their C2 about not accomplishing anything, cross-apply my argument about innovation, right? It's very clear that we accomplished a lot, right? Sure, we did put people on the moon. Sure, we, had drones in Venus and Mars. But the big thing is we're saving lives now with that technology, and that's really critical. Thank you so much. I earned a strong negation ballot. If you're ready, Dina, I stand ready for cross.
Okay, I am ready now. All right, first, amazing speech. You made a lot of good points. I just have a few questions. Do you mind on your innovation contention, what your 4th one was about? Did not have time to write that down.
Yeah, so I think my 4th was solar cells. So like solar energy.
All right. And then with easing tensions in your contention there. So originally Sputnik was seen as a threat. Yes.
A threat, you have to clarify, a threat to what?
Was seen as a threat by like the US about the Soviet Union being more superior in that area.
Yeah, so originally it was a challenge to U.S. superiority at first. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I don't really think I have any other questions for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dina.
Everyone is ready. I will start my 3-minute speech now. All right, first I'd like to extend the thank yous to everyone for making this debate possible, and I will move right in to reaffirming my points and then going to my opponents. Judge, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is about whether or not there was an adequate return from the money we put into the space war. And today I'm affirming that we have not seen the adequate return when we could have been using that money for much more important things. On my first contention about how there were so many domestic issues that we could have addressed more effectively at this time instead of spending all that time, money, and effort into this space war, my opponent's main argument is that most would not have passed and that we did have all these innovations that came from it. So that was an adequate return. However, I would like to say that not only was there money devoted to the space war, there was the time and effort that took more focus when we could have been focusing on more pressing issues. Even if reforms would not have been passed on infrastructure, healthcare, or education, these issues that are extremely important, more important to the American general public than the space war between the US and the Soviet Union was, they could have had more time, and we might have seen more progress now, even if they wouldn't have passed then. Even if we hadn't have seen that progress then, if we had devoted all that time, effort, and money into lobbying for these reforms, we would have seen much more progress, and we would be in a better state than we are now if we had. Therefore, I believe my contention stands and my opponent's arguments do not. On my contention about increasing tensions, even my opponent agrees that in the beginning, Sputnik was seen as a threat. Even if it did eventually ease tensions, in the beginning, when Sputnik was launched, the U.S. felt like its military was inadequate and therefore fueled the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, which did exacerbate tensions in the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Had we not had the space war happen, we might have seen a reconciliation between the two sooner, and we would not have as frosty relations as we did. And then my third contention about what we really accomplished, as I mentioned before, if we're talking about the space race and what it actually did rather than associated achievements, the space war in and of itself, without focusing on things that they could be technological advances that could be applied to the root space war, doesn't actually show anything. Therefore, I strongly urge an affirmation ballot.
Are my judges ready? Opponent ready? Awesome. My time will begin now. Thank you so much, Dina, for an incredible rebuttal. Like I said, very good. Congratulations on being here. You're incredible. It's obvious why you're here. Great job. To all my judges, once again, extend the thank yous. So let's jump in and kind of respond to some things. Then I'm going to try and give you some clarification. And then I'm going to try and weigh and give you voters, right? It's a lot to do. We're going to do our best. So let's start with the affirmative case, right? So they have three contentions that they offer. The first is that there are better alternatives. Now, in my last speech, I gave you three responses to this, right? The first was that we aren't able to implement those policies. Their response to this is that, we could have been focusing on things that were more important and dedicated effort instead of just money. And I think that's a valid point. The issue is, if we're going to do that, then we have to evaluate based off of where the effort would have been applied, right? In the 1970s, there wasn't as much focus on climate change and healthcare per se. It was on other things, right? And I would argue that like Americans cared about the space race, right? When Sputnik was launched and when the Apollo missions were going off, millions of people tuned in. Like this was something people cared about and wanted to fund, right? So that's a really big thing. But let's say you don't buy that for a second. If you don't buy that, extend my definitional argument. It goes unresponded to, right? So the definition of waste is use without adequate return, right? So in a vacuum, did we like buy or purchase something that had an adequate return? If so, it's not a waste. And I tell you in my technological innovations argument that it was absolutely worth it, right? So like definitionally, alternatives aren't evaluated as something that can be considered a waste, right? Maybe there were better like other opportunities retroactively. We couldn't have known that then. And even if we did, it doesn't fit in the definition because we're just evaluating whether or not we bought something nice. If there were 2 cars we could have bought, we bought one and we end up liking it, but we would have liked one more better. We didn't waste money on the first car, right? We could have bought something else, but like that's not what the word waste means. The third is weighing it, right? So like let's say you don't buy any of that and the better alternative stands, right? It's like, well, weigh a little bit of like $30 billion investment into those things against these massive technological innovations that I impact out, right? Like I tell you, and this goes unresponded to, that like cameras are used to save lives and promote human rights internationally. I tell you, insulin pumps reduce the likelihood of dying by 29%. LASIK has affected 30 million people. Solar cells are critical to environmental sustainability efforts, and the water purification systems helps a third of the world get access to clean water. These are huge impacts. And so it's clearly not a waste, right? So just weigh the marginal benefit of spending $30 billion then against all of these long-term innovation benefits. On their second contention about tensions, right? So this kind of responds to my second contention. I have one main response. It's like, yes, Sputnik may have been originally perceived as a threat. The issue is it changed. Now, I told you the best evidence that I had was from Karsten Worth in 2004, Journal of American Studies. And it says it started out competitive, it started out zero-sum, but it ended up being cooperative. I told you in my definition of the space race that it ended when Russia and the United States put people together in orbit. That's incredible, right? That's definitely not an escalation of the arms race. And the space race ended before the Cold War ended. So, you know, I think this is just like a sign of cooperation and peace. The Cold War can continue going on. It just reduces the threat of like nuclear war, which is, I think is really beneficial. I think it's a beneficial thing. And the third is about this like accomplishing things, innovation. And so I think this is basically like a little bit of a wash for as far as affirmative offense is concerned. There's not really a ton of affirmative offense there because I tell you we do other things aside from just land on the moon. Let's jump into the next case, right? So with regards to technological innovation, extend the 5 big pieces of technology, right? Insulin pumps, LASIK, solar cells, water purification, and image sensing that's used for cameras. This is a huge benefit to human rights, to people around the world, to the environment. Obviously, things that are clearly not wasted money. This extends across the flow pretty cleanly. They have a couple of responses with regards to whether or not it can be used as better alternatives, but weigh it. Like these are incredibly powerful technological innovations that only emerged because of the space race. The last thing is this like easing tensions argument. I think this is going to be like your biggest voter, right? You can vote on 2 things. Vote on technological information. I provided you lots of evidence under preponderance of evidence that tells you that you should be voting negation on tech, but also vote on like easing tensions, right? My opponent doesn't respond. The tensions are inevitably eased from the space race, and that's a good thing. Don't let them respond to this in their next speech by bringing up an argument saying it's not the case because that wasn't made in the former speech. And so you can vote on preponderance of evidence. Vote on Karsten Worth, 2004, the Journal of American Studies. There's a strong negation ballot. I really appreciate everyone. This has been incredible. Dina, thank you.
All right, everyone's ready. I will start my time now. I'd like to extend all the thank yous once again, and just it was an amazing debate. Thank everyone for being here. Going right into the reasons why the affirmative has won today's debate. So this debate goes back to whether or not there was an adequate return, and based on the preponderance of evidence both sides have produced today. And I believe firmly that the affirmation has done that. Going back to the crux of the issue, was there an adequate return? I strongly believe that there was not. given all the time, money, and effort that was put into the space war, which could have been diverted to much more pressing issues, the space war was a waste of money. My opponent on my first contention talks about his technological advancements, where what efforts have been applied. However, Judge, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is that all of this money, time, and effort could have been applied to domestic issues that impact and benefited the American people. At the end of the day, we're talking about the American people, not anything else. And they would have been much better off if we had focused on them rather than the competition between the US and the Soviet Union. In addition, on my second contention, this is also where we have a bit of a clash. At the end of the day, Judge, you have to understand that in the beginning with Sputnik, tensions did increase. The space war fueled tensions in the arms race, and it strained the already precarious relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States further. While yes, it may be true that there was that reconciliation and there was a cooperative effort at the end, the duration of the space war was a time where the relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States was very strained, and that is because of the Space War's efforts that fueled into the other avenues of the Cold War. Additionally, when I bring up what did we really accomplish, remember that we're talking about the Space War, which is just the competition about who could who could develop aerospace capabilities first. And looking at that in a vacuum about just who could develop it first, yes, we didn't really accomplish anything. It may be true that there was innovation that sprung out of it, but if we look just at the Cold War and what the Cold War itself produced, at the end of the day, Judge, when we talk about whether or not there was an adequate return, the ability to put people on the moon and to send satellites into space is not worth the time, money, and effort that we could have put into the domestic issues that Americans face every day. Therefore, on the basis of the welfare of the American people, I strongly urge an affirmation ballot. Thank you.
Great job, both of you. Really, really great job. I believe this is the last round of the night, correct? Yeah, so this is a great one to end on, personally. That's what I think.
Thank you guys so much for an awesome round, and congratulations to you both.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Want to second that. That was amazing on both sides. I didn't appreciate it because it makes my night harder. I was hoping to just break my fast and live my best life. But now I got. But Dina, you go break your fast while we decide on this.
Don't worry, I had my bag of dates next to me. I'm second. It was 7:08 here. I'm finally.
All right. Well, have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Isaac. You were really great.
You were great too. I appreciated it.